The Bangsamoro Basic Law, or BBL, appears to be one step closer to becoming a law. This after both chambers of Congress approved their respective versions on the third and final reading. No less than the President Duterte himself certified the bill as urgent. Back in 2015, during the Aquino administration, when the measure was first filed, the National Economic and Development Authority said the passage of the BBL will usher in peace and stability, attract new investors, and consequently boost economic growth of that region by nearly 13%. Experts have long touted Mindanao to be the land of promise, and BBL is supposed to help fulfill that promise. So tonight, this is our topic. Hello, I'm Maiki Oreta, and you're watching Square Off Season 15, The Firm Debates.
Mabibigyan natin ng sapat na oras ang ating mga kapatid na makapaghanda at tuluyang mapalago ang ipinunda nating pagbabago sa pamamahala sa Bangsamoro.
The Bangsamoro Basic Law, a measure first filed under the Aquino administration, could finally prosper.
I am racing against time. The MILF is in a hurry and has placed on us the burden of a timeline. And I have agreed to that period. I gave my solemn promise, and I assure you, I am working hard to meet the deadline.
Last month, the House and the Senate approved the measure on third and final reading. Now, a bicameral conference will need to reconcile the two chambers' versions before it is sent to the President's desk. This early, Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon says they have yet to think of a compromise with the House version, which excludes 39 North Cotabato municipalities from territorial jurisdiction under the Bangsamoro. Other critical issues include taxes, political dynasties, and so-called reserved powers.
Well, I explicitly included an amendment which says that the Bangsamoro people are citizens of the Republic of the Philippines pursuant to Article 4 of the Constitution. That's very basic. Hindi naman po, I don't think that their intention is to secede from the country by calling themselves Bangsamoro and not citizens of the Philippines. So it is very clear. Again, this is one of the issues which should not be contentious.
Pushing for the fact na wala at nabagong mga proprieta ko.
Even among the President's allies, there is lingering doubt over the BBL's constitutionality.
Parang puwaran to yan. Kaya mo Supreme Court ang mag-decide dyan. Diba? Hindi kami yung magsasabi kung constitutional yan o hindi.
The arm cannot be dismantled to give way to BBL without first amending the Constitution by abolishing arm and authorizing the Congress to enact the BBL in its place. We cannot place the cart before the horse.
The bill failed during the last administration. It was widely considered a casualty of the bloody Mama Sapano incident. So, is the Bangsamoro Basic Law unconstitutional?
Arguing for the affirmative side is the University of the Philippines. Imbued with honor and excellence, the next generation of lawyers from the University of the Philippines.
So our team strategy for the finals match, of course, to do extensive research and to coordinate with my teammates so that we will make sure that we will be able to really extensively study the issue.
I think our team's edge would be the pride that we have for our school and the hard work. I'm sure they have that as well, so it's going to be a competition.
I think our team's strategy is to research really well, to try and place ourselves in the positions
of the complainant and the respondent, we are going to make sure that we bring our charm, our wit, our flair, and our best understanding of the issue. To St. Louis University is that I hope we will have a good match. I hope that through our match we will help the general public to be informed about whatever issue we will be debating on.
Let's make it a great finals. Let's be engaging, and let's be sure to have a nice debate.
I hope we have a great match. I'm expecting not just to have heated discussions, but actually make sure to get to the heart of the issue and try to make sure that it's a match that really has sportsmanship at its core.
Team University of the Philippines. Sharp, fierce, diverse. And taking on the negative side is St. Louis University. All the way from the summer capital of the Philippines, Baguio City, the contenders from St. Louis University.
We have to do a lot of research. Obviously, we've got a difficult competitor in the finals, so we have to study the proposition well. We have to study all the angles and hopefully come up with the best arguments.
Our team's edge is that we are able to give the audience an analogy by which they could understand the legal perspective of a particular issue.
It's been 3 times since SLU got the first runner-up but not a championship belt, so we are hungry this time.
University of the Philippines, see you in the final match, and I hope that we give the audience the match that they deserve and as well a match that the legislators could base upon a good law in the future.
The University of the Philippines, well, they're known for being one of the best law schools in the country, so we hope that they bring a good game.
We all know how great the University of the Philippines is as an academic institution. I'm pretty sure they're coming in very much prepared as well. We are very much excited to face them, and we're coming in ready.
Team St. Louis University. Ethical, determined, talented. Let's now meet our distinguished judges. First off, we have attorney Kristen Charisse Shao and attorney Leah Glenda Quesada. Both are partners at the VNA law firm. Next, we have Judge Ralph Lee of Branch 83 NCJR Quezon City Station. And we have Judge Cynthia Marino Ricablanca from the Regional Trial Court Branch 27 of Santa Cruz, Laguna. And presiding as our chief adjudicator is attorney Joseph Anthony Lopez, a partner at the VNA law firm. We're using a modified Oregon-Oxford format. The debate is between 2 sides, the affirmative and the negative, with 3 members each. Each debater from the affirmative side argues the necessity, beneficiality, and practicability of the proposition, while the counterpart debaters on the negative side oppose these arguments. Each debater is given 4 minutes to deliver a constructive speech and rebut the previous argument. Each debater is given 2 minutes to interpolate or cross-examine the opposing debater. Only categorical questions may be asked. Each of the judges may ask 1 question of each speaker within that speaker's time limit. The judges score each team in terms of manner, matter, and interpolation. The team with a higher score from each judge gets a point. The team with the most number of points wins the debate. The chief adjudicator rules in the event of ties, objections, or contestations. This week's proposition, let it be resolved that the Bangsamoro Basic Law is unconstitutional. Starting for the affirmative side, we have Tanya. Tanya, you've got 4 minutes to tell us why we must assert that the Bangsamoro Basic Law goes against our Constitution.
Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution is ordained by the sovereign people, therefore its postulates cannot be used as bargaining chips without their consent. This is the statement of Chief Justice Puno in his concurring opinion in the 2008 case of North Cotabato versus government. Today I will argue that the Bangsamoro Basic Law, or BBL, is unconstitutional on 3 grounds. First, it violates the separation of powers. Section 4, Article 7 of the BBL provides that the Bangsamoro Chief Minister, which is their head executive official, shall be chosen by the Bangsamoro Parliament among its members. This directly contravenes Section 18, Article 10 of the Constitution, which requires in express and clear terms that the head executive of the autonomous regions must be elected by their constituents. It's also inconsistent with the state policy enshrined in Article 2 that the Philippines is a democratic and republican state. Section 2, Article 11 of the BBL also establishes the Bangsamoro Police, which shall perform all duties as may be required by the Bangsamoro Parliament. This is repugnant to Article 16 of the Constitution, which provides that the state shall maintain one police force which is national in scope. The Bangsamoro Parliament is not part of the chain of command of the PNP, the same way that local police units do not report to the Sangguniang Panlalawigan or any other legislative bodies. This is because the task of faithfully executing the laws is an executive function. Therefore, the BBL encroaches on the power of the executive when it grants police control to the Bangsamoro Parliament. It also disturbs the system of checks and balances enshrined in our Constitution. Second, the BBL violates the independence of constitutional bodies. Section 2, Article 12 of the BBL establishes the Bangsamoro Auditing Office, which has a primary role of auditing all funds of the Bangsamoro government. But this is a power granted by the Constitution to the Commission on Audit. Under Article 9, no law can be passed exempting any government entity from the jurisdiction of COA. A mere legislative enactment such as the BBL cannot derogate the powers of a constitutional body. It is also important to note that a large portion of Bangsamoro's funds will be coming from the national government. This would therefore compromise public accountability if we allow Bangsamoro to audit itself. Third, the Bangsamoro government also usurps legislative power. Section 3, Article 10 of the BBL provides that the Bangsamoro Parliament may create, divide, or abolish provinces. But as held by the Supreme Court in the case of Sema versus Comelec, the power to create provinces carries with it the power to increase the membership in the House of Representatives. Under Section 5, Article 6 of the Constitution, only Congress has the power to do this. Section 38, Article 13 of the BBL also grants the Bangsamoro government the power to issue franchises for the operation of transportation and telecommunication facilities. But this is a power exclusively granted to Congress under Article 12 of the Constitution. Congress may delegate this power to administrative bodies, but for this delegation to be valid, it must be circumscribed in specific limitations on how such authorities may be exercised. In the case of BBL, there is no such restriction. Therefore, it constitutes an undue delegation of power to the Bangsamoro Parliament. Your Honors, these are just some of the many unconstitutional provisions of the BBL. Although its objective may be noble or valid, we at the affirmative side believe that these objectives should be pursued within constitutional means. Thank you.
2 minutes for the cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Tanya. You mentioned about the Bangsamoro Commission on Audit, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Very good. And under Senate Bill and House Bill, the Bangsamoro Commission on Audit is answerable to the National Commission on Audit. Is that right?
That's not true. It's
that
a separate
is actually
and distinct
provided
entity.
under the Senate Bill
They
and
have
House
a separate
Bill.
entity.
Let's
and actually,
proceed
they
with
perform
the
the
next
same
question.
functions.
Tanya, next question. Let's compare ARMM and BBL.
Sure.
You are in the position that BBL must be declared unconstitutional, right?
Yes, of course.
So you are also in turn in the position that we shall remain in the status quo. Is that right?
No, that's not our position.
That should be your position
That
because
is
you
not-
are
don't
pushing
give us
for
our position, please.
you are pushing for the unconstitutionality of a proposed law.
Mhm.
In both ARMM and BBL, the people remain to be citizens of the Philippines. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that is constitutional, right?
That is
Very
constitutional.
good. Next. In ARMM, the multiplicity of ideology and principles of the Bangsamoro people were considered by the constitutional framers,
That
right?
is in the Constitution, that's
Thank
correct.
you. And in BBL, these were considered, plus the Bangsamoro people were also given the chance to participate in the drafting of the BBL.
Well, the MILF and
Perfect.
the government did.
Next question.
But the MILF is
In
not representative
BBL
of the Muslim people.
Ms. Speaker,
Sure.
in BBL, the Bangsamoro people are given the choice to choose whether or not to join the Bangsamoro region. There is a plebiscite, right?
No,
there is a plebiscite, and that is granted under Article 10 of the
of the
Constitution,
BBL.
right?
Yes.
Very good. And in ARMM, the Bangsamoro government shall be under the supervision of the president.
Yes,
That
but it
is
has
also
it has a
expressly
different
provided
structure,
under
which
the
is very
Senate bill and
peculiar.
the House bill. Is that correct?
The Bangsamoro government has a
Just
different
answer with
structure.
a yes or no, Tanya,
We have
please.
a parliament. Sure.
Tanya, is that a yes or no?
I have a
That's
qualified
yes.
answer.
Next, in ARMM, they are given the right to self-determination.
Yes.
Okay, Mico, you've got 4 minutes now to rebut Tanya and to advance your argument on why the Bangsamoro Basic Law is indeed constitutional.
The fate and destiny of the Bangsamoro is a fate intertwined with our own and our entire country. A future which could spell war and fragmentations, a future that could serve as peace and justice for all. This is the statement of Commissioner Banagan in the Volume 3 of the Record of the Constitutional Commission. Everyone, good evening. St. Louis University respectfully submits that the Bangsamoro Basic Law is in compliance with the constitutional mandate as provided under Article 10 of the Constitution. First rebuttal, Your Honors. The form of government is valid such that the Chief Minister and the other officials remain to be elected and not appointed. What is actually frowned upon under our Constitution is the appointment of our Chief Minister, which goes contrary to our democracy, Your Honors. Next rebuttal that we would like to provide from the first speaker is that the police and the armed forces of the Bangsamoro region are still answerable to the national government. Yes, Your Honor.
So is it your position that if the head of state suddenly becomes a prime minister and is elected by the House of Representatives, this would not be unconstitutional because it's the same system being used in the BBL?
Your Honors, that would be a part of the autonomy expressly granted. And it could be inferred also from the record of the Constitutional Commission that Commissioner Noliedo provided that the autonomous region will give a bold and unequivocal answer to the cry for meaningful, effective, and forceful autonomy, which has been loud and clear all over the country. Proceeding with my arguments, Your Honors. First, the BBL solidifies the constitutional vision. Sections 1 and 15 of Article 10 of the Constitution mandatorily provides for an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao in accordance with the people's cultural heritage and within the framework of the Constitution. The Constitution is not deaf with regard to the Bangsamoro struggle, Your Honors. Commissioner Ople and Commissioner Benagan recognized that the people of Mindanao have experienced so much injustices like the Javida massacre, and it is already the time for us to pass this bill. We are actually, or most of the people are in the misplaced belief that the reason as to why there is violence in the Mindanao is because they are pushing for their belief. What the affirmative failed to realize is that the reason as to why we have violence is because the government failed to exercise its mandate of complying with Article 10 of the Constitution. Second point, Your Honor, BBL is a more accurate depiction of the Constitution compared to ARMM. The purpose of both ARMM and BBL is to address the grievances of the Bangsamoro people in accordance with Article 10 and in consideration of their cultural matrix. This is because Article 12 of the Constitution provides equitable distribution of opportunities, income, and wealth. Furthermore, it is provided under Article 13 that the mandate of the Congress is to enact measures that remove cultural inequities by equitable diffusion of wealth and political power. Your Honors, democracy. Yes, Your Honor.
So is it really your position that all of these inequities and injustices will be solved and resolved by the passage of the BBL?
Your Honors, BBL is not a silver bullet or a panacea. It is actually the government's commitment to adhere to the mandate of the Constitution. Your Honors, we must remember that democracy does not only represent the will of the majority. True democracy represents a system where the interests of the majority are championed without necessarily prejudicing the minority. With that, I end my speech. Thank you.
2 minutes for the cross-examination.
Mr. Speaker.
Good evening, Tanya.
Do you agree that the MILF is not representative of the entire population of Muslim Mindanao?
But they are a part of Muslim
Yes,
Mindanao.
but they are not representative of the entire population, correct?
That's why we have the
We have the
plebiscite, Ms.
Christians in
Speaker.
Muslim Mindanao,
The
you have
Bangsamoro
the
people
the MLF,
will provide
it's my
their
time, Mr.
call
Speaker.
or their shout for
Thank you,
justice
Mr.
through the
Speaker.
plebiscite.
The MLF is also a faction in the Muslim
Which
Mindanao,
was considered
correct?
in the record of the
Yes.
Constitutional
So are you
Commission.
aware that the MNLF actually opposes the creation of the Bangsamoro?
Ms. Speaker, the plebiscite
Please
will
answer
provide
with
the
a yes or no. Do
opportunity
you
to the
agree, Mr.
people for them
Speaker?
to decide for what law
Do you
should
agree
govern
that
them.
they oppose it?
They are opposing
Based
it,
on
but
the
not
news, based on
everyone.
facts,
Ms.
they
Speaker.
oppose, right?
MNLF
Correct.
is not
So
also
given that-
representative of the whole Bangsamoro
Thank you, Mr.
people.
Speaker. Given that there is a faction that opposes the BBL, what gives you the guarantee? Or is there
The
any
plebiscite,
guarantee?
Ms. Speaker, the
Is there a
plebiscite will
guarantee
speak for
that
the
peace
people.
will be
That
achieved
would
through the
decide
BBL?
for the people.
Next
Ms. Speaker.
question.
That would
Are you
represent
familiar
the
with the rules of
majority the
statutory
Bangsamoro.
construction, Mr. Speaker?
Very well, Ms.
Good.
Speaker.
So if the wording of the Constitution is clear, we have to apply
But
the literal
we-
meaning, correct?
The Constitution is not
Okay.
self-executing,
I want
Ms.
to ask you, Mr. Speaker,
We
is
must
an
look
elected-
into the intent of the framers
Is the
of the
elected official the
Constitution, Ms.
same as an
Speaker.
appointed official? Yes or no?
No.
It's different, correct? So
Yes,
the
and
Constitution requires
the
that the
chief
executive
minister here
head
is
of
an
the
elective
BBL, of the Bangsamoro, must
officer, Ms.
be
Speaker.
elected by its constituents, right? But
They
the
are
BBL
elected.
provide
They are choosing
no,
the
they are
parliament
appointed.
leaders
They are
by
chosen
reason
by
of
the parliament
election.
members.
They are
That is the
chosen
very
by the
definition of an
Bangsamoro
appointment.
people.
Thank you.
That's in the Senate
Next
bill,
point,
Ms.
Mr.
Speaker.
Speaker. Please
Senate
let
Bill
me speak, Mr.
177
Speaker.
1717.
The Bangsamoro Auditing Office is separate and distinct from COA.
But
you
it
have
is
to review Section
answerable
12.
to the National Commission on
But the
Audit, Ms.
functions of
Speaker.
Bangsamoro Auditing Office and the COA are the same, right?
They are the same, but
Yes.
if
So do you know why COA is given the status of a constitutional body that is an independent body?
there's a valid delegation here, Ms. Speaker,
No,
because
Ms.
it
I'm
is a
asking you if you
product
know
of
why.
legislative law.
Do you know why it's an independent body?
Let's now hear from the second affirmative speaker, Bass. You've got 4 minutes to tell us why it would be beneficial to deem the Bangsamoro Basic Law as unconstitutional.
Good afternoon, judges. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is not enough for the other side to provide broad economic provisions under the BBL and talk about how it conforms to broad constitutional policies. Because it is possible that a bill can be unconstitutional as a whole, even if it has valid provisions. And if you take a look at what Tanya has discussed in her speech, she talks about unconstitutional provisions that, if stricken out, would actually make the entire bill, the BBL, ineffective in terms of providing a structure of government. That's why she talks about how it's fundamentally unconstitutional that the chief head or the head of parliament is elected by the legislators or the parliament, because under the constitution that is actually that should be done by the people or by the Bangsamoro as a whole. And she talks about how it's unconstitutional, for instance, that the National Police Force is also under or subsumed under the parliament when it actually should be controlled by the PNP in the central government. So what we argue is that these provisions are essentially important to the structure of the bill, that if taken out, it would actually render the bill meaningless as a whole, because it would mean that the structure of the BBL as a government could not function anymore. When the other speaker talked about how there's a need for a bill to alleviate poverty, we think this is concedable, because no one is arguing that we need a bill. What we're arguing is whether or not this bill as it stands is constitutional. What I want to talk about in my argument will be how the BBL undermines the Constitution by imposing additional qualifications for top appointed government officials. In the case of SJS versus Dangerous Drugs Board, the Supreme Court ruled that qualifications for appointed officials, when prescribed by the Constitution, are generally exclusive, except for instances where the Constitution provides otherwise. What we would argue is that the BBL adds extra constitutional qualifications for two positions, mainly one, justices of the Supreme Court, and two, commissioners of constitutionally mandated bodies. And this is explicit from two provisions of the Bangsamoro Basic Law. Number one, Section 27, which basically states out that it is the policy of the central government that at least one justice of the Supreme Court shall be a qualified individual of the Bangsamoro territory. And secondly, Section 14 of the BBL, which basically states that it is also the policy of the central government to appoint one Bangsamoro commissioner in each of the constitutional bodies. We argue that these provisions of the BBL are fundamentally unconstitutional for providing qualifications beyond the citizenship, age, and competency requirements as already exclusively enumerated in Article 8, Section 7 for Supreme Court justices and Article 9, Section 1, Parts B, C, and D for heads of constitutional commissions. While the Constitution prescribes that the Congress may add qualifications for officials of lower courts and judges of lower courts, when it comes to Supreme Court justices and when it comes to the heads of these constitutional commissions, the Constitution is already exclusive and clear about what the qualifications are. And what the BBL basically does is that it adds to these qualifications with the requirement that at least there should be one representation from the Bangsamoro region. But on a more principled level, we will also argue that the requirement for a Bangsamoro representative undermines the very separation of checks and balances by placing substantial limitations on the president's power to appoint. Under the case of Kuyuking versus Cruz, the presidential power to appoint should necessarily have a reasonable measure of freedom, latitude, and discretion, subject only to the exceptions, number one, of those needing concurrence from the Commission of Appointments, and two, those from the exercise of limited legislative power. By imposing a Bangsamoro legislature, we actually undermine the power of the president to appoint. Thank
2
you.
minutes now for the cross-examination.
Good evening, Mr. Speaker.
Good evening.
The AFP has been battling insurgencies in Mindanao for several decades now.
Yes.
Almost 5 decades,
Yes.
correct? Very well. Do you know the death estimate as of this time?
I'm pretty sure it's a lot, but that does not argue for
Thank
the
you so much.
constitutionality of the bill,
Thank you
only
so
that
much
there's
for
a
that
need to
answer.
lessen this violence.
Okay, I'll move forward. So it must be safe to say then that many families are displaced because of these insurgencies.
Yes, we understand that
Thank
the
you very
conflict
much.
is
I'll
horrible
move
and
forward,
bad.
Mr. Speaker. And also, it would be safe to say that because of the conflict in Mindanao, it also resulted to high unemployment.
Yes, but what is your point, Mr.
Thank you
Speaker?
very much. I'll lead you there. Do you know how much the government spent over the last 30 years in battling insurgencies?
I'm pretty sure that it is a lot. Again, we are not arguing that no solution should happen.
Okay, if
we are
you don't know
simply
the
arguing
exact
that the
amount,
bill at its
I'll
current
tell you
form
that's 2
is
million.
unconstitutional.
I will move forward. So do you think that this will attract economic investors if we have armed conflict continuously in Mindanao?
No, it will not, Mr. Speaker.
Of course not. So while we are losing your honors, we are also spending for the cost of war in Mindanao. I'll move forward, Mr.
That's
Speaker.
an argument about not having
Mr.
public
Speaker,
policies, and
I'll
it's
move
not an
forward.
argument about why this bill is
Can I
constitutional
move
or
forward,
not.
Mr. Speaker?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It is the duty of the national government to create an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, correct?
Yes.
That's provided
Compliant
in the
to the
Constitution.
requirements of the Constitution, which this
Absolutely.
bill
I'll
undermines.
move forward. The consideration of this duty is the struggle of the Bangsamoro people, correct?
Yes.
So you would agree with me then that insurgency is a symptom that a system is not working.
Yes.
And the system is, and the reason of these insurgency
Again,
is
we are not arguing
under-representation,
that no
correct?
law should be passed. We are arguing that at
And
its
Mr.
current
Speaker,
form,
can
the
I
law
please
is
continue my question?
unconstitutional.
And of course, the reason of this insurgency is misrepresentation of the Bangsamoro people,
We
correct?
completely agree that we need representation, just not under this current law. Thank
Okay,
you.
break it up, guys. Lester, you've got 4 minutes now to rebut Bass and to advance your argument on why it would be beneficial to deem the Bangsamoro Basic Law as constitutional.
Immanuel Kant said, peace is a genuine end, or indeed the end of politics, because it is desired or willed by everyone. Your honors, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. SLU is in a firm stand that the BBL is constitutional and beneficial for 2 reasons. First, it will promote development in Bangsamoro region as determined by the Bangsamoro people, and second, it will establish Mindanao as an economic boon. But before I proceed to my constructives, let me first rebut the previous affirmative speaker, wherein he said that the proposed Bangsamoro law will provide additional qualifications of the justices of the Supreme Court. Your honors, we have to remember that the justices of the Supreme Court will still have to go through tough scrutiny coming from the Judicial and Bar Council. And while it is true that it is proposed that there is a candidate coming from the Bangsamoro region, that does not guarantee that he or she will automatically be appointed as one of the justices of the Supreme Court because he or she still has to go through the Judicial and Bar Council as provided in Article 10, Section 25 of the BBL. Now, I'll proceed to my first argument. Peace is not the mere absence of tanks and guns. Sometimes peace is achieved by conquering poverty and oppression. Today, the Bangsamoro region is has the highest poverty level in the country, afflicting 5 million people with a poverty rate of 48.2%, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. It is the promise of the Constitution, Your Honors, to uplift the Filipino, as Article 12, Section 1 states that all sectors of the economy and all regions in the country shall be given optimum opportunity to develop. The BBL provides the Bangsamoro people the right to determine the policies to achieve optimum development of their diverse resources as forwarded by Article 10, Section 20 of the Constitution. Currently, Your Honors, the National Legislature, Your Honor.
How do you address the position of the affirmative that they are not disputing everything you're saying, and that their only issue is very specific provisions under the BBL and not the beneficiality of the BBL per se?
Actually, Your Honors, we were also quite surprised that the provision cited earlier by the affirmative side regarding the power that the Bangsamoro Parliament over has PNP, COA, and even the one provided by the second speaker, because they were already cured, Your Honors. What they were referring to are the previous bills regarding the BBL, which was already cured by the House and Senate bills that are available right now for deliberation in the next session of the Congress. If I may continue, Your Honors, the development aggression is similar to a one-size-fits-all approach where Congress enacts measures in hope that this would be applicable to all. The BBL provides an alternative solution by giving liberty to the Bangsamoro parliamentary to draft their own future by legislating their own laws for their own future. Now, that leads me to my second point. According to NEDA research, several areas in Mindanao are identified as high potentials. In addition, micro businesses account for a considerable portion of the economy. Further, Mindanao is seen to be a magnet of foreign investments coming from the Arab region and nearby Muslim countries in propagating halal-based industry. At the end of the day, all these will contribute to national development pursuant to Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution. To our Bangsamoro brothers and sisters, and to all of us Filipinos, Assalamu alaikum.
2 minutes for the cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker.
Good afternoon.
Is it true that your first speaker claimed that the chief minister in this Bangsamoro parliament is elected by the people at large under the BBL? Is that your claim?
The ones who are elected are those who are members of the parliament.
Okay, but under the Constitution, do you agree that it is required that the chief minister should be elected by the people?
Well, actually, there's no difference.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
That calls for a qualification. Qualified no.
Do you agree that the Constitution specifically enumerates that both the legislature and the executive should be elected by the people at large?
That's right. That's right. There's no contest to that.
And so that under the BBM, it is only the legislature that's elected because the chief minister, the executive, is selected by that legislature, and therefore there's a violation of the constitutional
Who is
provision.
also elected by the people at large.
Yes, but why would the Constitution make a distinction between electing the legislature and the executive, which are dual requirements?
Well,
if it's only the parliament that is elected by the people.
The Constitution.
Let's move on. Okay. Under Article 9D, Section 2, do you agree that it is the exclusive authority of the COA to basically determine and define the limits of its audit?
That's
under
correct.
the Constitution.
And under the Bangsamoro system, it's a delegated power.
And under the Bangsamoro system, do you agree that there's a Bangsamoro auditing office that basically is primarily
Same with the
responsible
local
for
government
actually
units right
auditing
now.
the funds?
There's also a local.
So do you agree that this Bangsamoro auditing office actually undermines the exclusive authority of the COA?
Absolutely not, because just like what I said, Your Honors, there are also regional offices
It actually
of
does,
COA
because the
right
primary
now.
wording of the Bangsamoro Basic Law is
That's
that they are primarily responsible, which actually undermines the exclusive
Mr.
responsibility
Speaker, that's a valid delegation
of
of
the COA.
power.
Do you agree that the structure of government, the selection of parliament, and the selection of the local police force are essential to the functioning of the Bangsamoro?
And they're still under the supervision of the Chief PNP.
Let's now hear from the third affirmative speaker, Angela. You've got 4 minutes to tell us why it would be practicable to deem the Bangsamoro Basic Law as unconstitutional.
Good evening, Your Honors. As much as affirmative side wants the self-determination of the Bangsamoro people to be realized, we say that this bill, the BBL, is not the proper avenue to do so. We are not precluded on affirmative from seeking a new system for the representation of the Bangsamoro. All we say is that the BBL as it is unconstitutional. And if it is struck down in the middle of its implementation, we say that further violence and economic instability will result, which is the actual converse of what SLU wants to achieve. We are talking about, in fact, the unamended Senate Bill S-1717, which was passed on the third reading. And it seems that SLU has not read the news that, in fact, the removed provisions from the House and the Senate were, in fact, restored upon the third reading when it was not actually changed. That's why I shall talk as third affirmative about 3 constitutional requirements that have not been satisfied. First, the necessity for charter change. Second, the prohibition against parliamentary government. And third, the requirement that our government be a unitary one. On the first argument, we say that the ARMM cannot be abolished by the BBL but only by the Constitution. Article 10, Sections 1 and 15 of the Constitution states that our autonomous regions to be created will be in Muslim Mindanao and in the Cordilleras, thus excluding the Bangsamoro entity, which is a much larger region than the ARMM. But moreover, the creation of the ARMM was by constitutional mandate, especially considering Article 10, Section 18, requiring Congress to enact the corresponding organic act. The BBL, therefore, as a mere legislative statute, cannot abolish the ARMM and its organic act. What the Constitution has created, only the Constitution may destroy. On the second argument, we argue that the Constitution mandates a presidential system of government for autonomous regions. Let us note, Article 10, Section 18 requires that organic acts creating autonomous regions must define the government structure. And the wording of this section is that the executive department and the legislative assembly are separate bodies and both must be elective and representative. This is not something that the BBL complies with at this time. In the BBL, we will see in Article 7, Sections 3 and 4 that executive and legislative power both reside in the Parliament. Therefore, this goes against our separation of powers, which is clearly delineated in Article 6 and 7 of our Constitution. Yes, Your Honor.
How do you address the fact that the heads of the Liga ng Barangay are elected by the different councilors and is normally one of the vice mayors, and this is not provided for under the Constitution but under the local government code?
We understand that particular institution. However, we would say that different standards apply for legal bodies as it would apply for constitutional bodies, which is why we would say that the requirement of being elective, representative, and presidential is something that would still apply to autonomous regions, even if it may not apply to the Liga and other sorts of institutions, Your Honor. Moving forward to the third argument of affirmative, we would argue that the Constitution mandates a unitary system of government. The BBL seems to create a federal substate with local versions of all national agencies and powers. However, the 1989 case of Limbona versus Mangilian shows that this level of autonomy can only be claimed by the 2 autonomous regions under their organic acts, such organic acts that have been recognized in the Constitution. Otherwise, said Justice Carpio Morales, there would be self-immolation and the autonomous region would not anymore be accountable to the central government. It is unconstitutional to have decentralization and to have the central government continue to cede power and authority to other political substates that may form as a result of this precedent. That's why we would say that this decentralization of a region not recognized in the Constitution is untenable. Thank you, Your Honors.
2 minutes for the cross-examination.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Since it is my turn to ask question, I would appreciate strictly true or false answers to the following.
All right.
The Constitution provisions are not self-executing.
Not all of them? No.
Section 18, Article 10 is not self-executing. That's the reason why it calls for an organic act.
Yes, which was required by Congress.
May I proceed? Creation of ARMM is through the law.
Yes, that's right.
Once passed, then it must be absolute and it must be perpetual. Let me answer, that's false. Next question. Let us talk about economics. The national GDP growth of the Philippines in 2017 is 9.16%.
All right, if you say so.
ARMM GDP growth is even higher at 13.1%.
All right.
ARMM has resources that, when tapped, can result to economic
What is the
growth.
relevance of this,
May
Council?
I think I'm the one asking questions. May I proceed? Next question. Encounters between the government and the MILF and MNLF resulted in fatalities.
Of course.
In 2008 rather, the MOA AD was declared unconstitutional, making the MILF conduct an offensive campaign. That's again
right.
true. In 2008 offensive campaign, it resulted in 800 fatalities.
That's right, yes.
600,000 people displaced. And displacement
Terrible
results in children not going to school. Displacement results in families in evacuation areas for indefinite period.
That's right.
Displacement causes unemployment.
Of course.
Involuntary loss of employment is detrimental to an
Yes,
improved
Council,
quality of
yes,
life.
of course.
Deprivation of education is not quality of life.
Of course, it is
No
not.
further questions.
Okay, Diana, you've got 4 minutes now to rebut Angela and to advance your argument on why the proposition, which deems the Bangsamoro Basic Law as unconstitutional, is not practicable.
When the call for peace stagnates, the call for harder actions become more convincing. The BBL is both constitutional and practicable on 2 points. First, now is the best time to pass BBL, and second, the cost of peace is less than the cost of war. Moving on to my rebuttals. First, the affirmative side would like us to believe that Article 10, Section 18 provides for a that the Constitution provides for a direct election of the leaders, but nowhere in the reading of Section 18, Article 10 provides for direct election by the people at large. Therefore, the election by the Parliament and by the Chief Minister of the Parliament, which was earlier elected by the people at large, is considered a democratic process. Moving on, it is also stated in Article 11, Section 2, that the Bangsamoro Police is under the Philippine National Police. This is just equivalent to QCPD, Baguio City Police Office. They are just equivalent in the regional departments. Moreover, it does not make Philippines parliament. The Constitution provides that Philippines is a republican and a republican state. However, it does not make it parliamentary just because the Bangsamoro region is adopting parliamentary. We have to consider that the reason why they have a different form of government is because that works best for them. Moreover, they also claim that there is violation of independence. It must be remembered that again, the COA at large is still responsible to the auditing office of the Bangsamoro. Moving on to my speech. The social, economic, and political milieu at present are all highly conducive for the passage of BBL. 1. Socially, majority of Bangsamoro people have been clamoring for genuine autonomy. This is proven by the fact that MILF and MNLF leaders come and go, but supporters keep coming. Economically, it has been seen that ARMM was able to grow its economy despite the Marawi siege. Then we can just imagine how much more can it optimize when it is already given genuine autonomy. And third,
Council, you tried to address all of the arguments of the affirmative. However, I did not hear a rebuttal to the statement that the BBL violates the legislative power of Congress because it delegates the power to give franchises.
Your Honors, it does not violate the same because in this case, it is actually constitutional in such a way that it is based on social justice, that is Section 1 of Article 13, which provides that it should be inequalities should be reduced and the indigenous peoples or the minorities should be given the right to self-determination internal in scope. This means that their economic development will have to be based on what they see fit for their culture. That is why the grant of the franchise as delegated by the Legislative Department to the Bangsamoro region is exclusive within Bangsamoro region. Thereby, the Legislative is not really abrogating the power to do so. Moving on, if we do not grant now these BBL, the more that we delay justice, the Bangsamoro is more drawn to radical ideology as we've already seen historically. And in every war, second point, it has also been seen that there are negative repercussions of the war, so that the ultimate fruit of this is peace. What would it do? It will eradicate displacement, which now will guarantee an improved and quality life under Sections 9 and 12 of Article 2 of the Constitution. It also unites the Philippines, one Philippines protecting each other. This is under Section 4 of Article 2 of the Constitution, the duty of the state to serve and protect. Failure to grant genuine autonomy through BBL is blood in our hands, blood of the fallen troops, of the MILF who have well-founded cause, of the people caught in crossfire. Therefore, we say, being constitutionally firm, it must be granted. Kapya, kalilintad, salam, kapayapaan para sa bayan. Thank you.
2 minutes for the cross-examination.
Good evening.
Hi.
I have a question. Is the BBL the only way to attain economic development?
But it is the
yes
motion.
Or no, Council?
But it is the motion.
Is it the only way? Because that is your argument. So
One
you
of
have
the best.
Understood. So it is
that they
not
are
mutually
minorities.
exclusive that we can have economic development.
is the
Let's move
question?
on. It is your position, however, that the BBL is constitutional.
Yes.
And the opt-in provision for any sort of province is also constitutional.
It is.
Even if these provinces,
based on the
these
Constitution,
units,
because they are
this is the
minorities,
BBL
the
we're
right
talking
to
about,
determine
Council. Just a
how they
minute.
could-
If you let me finish my line of questioning, my question was about whether or not there is an opt-in provision and it's constitutional. Yes?
It is.
Even if they are not traditionally defined as Bangsamoro, that's right.
Because there is
Even
a
if,
definite
does the
definition.
BBL put a Bangsamoro population requirement for
You have
opt-in
to
provision?
understand it is not
Yes
just about
or
the
no?
Moros, but
Because
about
we
the
know that there is not.
minorities.
We know that the benefits of the
We should
Bangsamoro
not
can
limit the
extend to
definition of
non-Bangsamoro
Bangsamoro to
individuals.
Bangsamoro.
Thank you, Council. Let's move on. You agree that the BBL was passed because to recognize the Bangsamoro struggle.
It
Yes?
is one
so
of
you
the
believe
reasons,
that cultural and
not the
ethnic groups,
exclusive reasons.
Council, let me finish. So you believe that cultural and ethnic groups deserve their own political entity, yes?
Political government.
So you
are deserved
agree,
based
but
on the
doesn't
right-
that mean that tribes, for example, or any sort of cultural group can now petition to have their own separate region, and you're fine with
That
that?
is not constitutionally guaranteed. This is
But
different
you
for
would
Bangsamoro because it is based on constitution. You
But we
cannot
would
just
say, for
use the
example, and let's
others.
talk about the
That
Cordillera
is
then, who's
misleading,
also in the
Speaker.
Constitution. Let's talk about that. We just say that they do
We
deserve their
already
own
have the
state.
administrative
So we
region.
would say that there's a lot of precedent for a
Cordillera
lot of
Broad
cultural
Coalition
groups
case, it
to
was
actually
stated that
create
that is the
separate
preliminary step
sub-states.
into
Let's-
creating an
please let me
autonomous
finish my
region in the
question,
Cordillera
Council.
if you've read the case.
Let's move on then to a different line of questioning instead. Do regional agencies report directly to the national government?
They have accountability.
Let's now hear what our judges have to say about our debaters. Judge Lee, how did the affirmative side, the University of the Philippines, do?
University of the Philippines, you were able to present your side clearly and orderly. Excellent performance. Congrats.
Judge Rica Blanca, how did the negative side, St. Louis University, do?
Congratulations, likewise, are in order for St. Louis University. They researched well for this debate, and it showed in their presentation. So congratulations. Well done.
And now let's hear from our chief adjudicator, Attorney Joseph Anthony Lopez. Attorney Lopez, who did the judges pick for best speaker?
For Best Speaker, we had a difficult time choosing. It was a split decision, and the vote was very close. But ultimately, we decided that the Best Speaker is Ms. Dianalyn Santos.
And the school that emerges as the champions?
Again, we also had a difficult time here. It was a split decision, but we would like to congratulate the University of the Philippines.
A big congratulations to the University of the Philippines for rising to the top spot and for taking home the grand champion title of Square Off Season 15, The Firm Debates. I'm Maiki Oreta, and see you all again in Season 16.